We bought two identical F-150 crew cabs on the same day from the same dealer for the same job. One had the turbocharged EcoBoost V6 under the hood. The other had the naturally aspirated 5.0-liter V8. Same driver rotation, same towing loads, same routes for 200,000 miles. I've been a Ford technician for over 15 years, and I wanted to settle this argument for good. What we found wasn't even close, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which engine to put your money on. Let's talk about how this whole thing started, because the setup matters. Both trucks were 2019 F-150 XLT crew cabs, four-wheel drive, same rear axle ratio, same tires, same trim level. The only difference was the engine, the turbocharged 2.7-liter EcoBoost in one, and the naturally aspirated 5.0-liter Coyote V8 in the other. We split all the driving between the same three drivers, alternated weekly, and used both trucks for identical jobs, hauling equipment, towing trailers, highway commuting, and city driving. Every oil change happened at the same mileage interval. Every tire rotation happened together. If one truck went to the shop for anything, we documented it down to the part number and the cost. This wasn't a controlled laboratory test with dynamometers and climate chambers. This was two work trucks living the exact same life for 4 years and 200,000 miles, which honestly tells you more than any spec sheet ever could. The first thing that separated these trucks happened almost immediately, and it had nothing to do with reliability. It was how the power actually showed up. The EcoBoost made its torque low in the revolutions per minute range because of boost pressure building almost instantly off idle. Merging onto the highway empty, the turbo truck felt quicker, more eager, more alive at low speeds. The 5.0-liter V8 needed to climb into the revolutions per minute range before it woke up. Naturally aspirated engines make peak torque higher in the power band because there is no forced induction pushing extra air into the cylinders at low revolutions per minute. You are relying purely on displacement and airflow, so the power builds progressively instead of arriving all at once. Neither of these traits is wrong, they are just different personalities. And for the first 6 months, most of our drivers actually preferred the turbo truck for daily driving because it felt more responsive around town. But then we started towing, and this is where the story got a lot more interesting. We pulled a 7,500-pound equipment trailer behind both trucks on identical routes, same mountain grades, same interstate stretches, same fuel stops. The EcoBoost truck handled the low end of the pull noticeably better. That turbo torque advantage translated directly into easier trailer starts from a stop and less strain getting up to speed. The transmission in the turbo truck didn't have to work as hard low in the rev range because the boost was already filling in the torque curve. The 5-liter V8 truck needed more throttle input and higher revolutions per minute to move the same load, which meant the transmission hunted for gears more and the engine spent more time working harder to produce the same forward motion. On paper, this made the turbo truck look like the clear winner for towing, and for the first 60,000 miles, it was. Then we got to the mountain grades and the story flipped. Sustained climbs are brutal for turbocharged engines because the turbo has to work continuously to maintain boost pressure while the engine is under heavy load for extended periods. Climbing a long grade with a loaded trailer, the EcoBoost truck's coolant temperature crept higher than the naturally aspirated trucks every single time. The turbocharger itself was running extremely hot exhaust gas through it constantly, and that heat has to go somewhere. Ford's engineers designed cooling systems to handle this, and the truck never overheated or triggered a warning, but you could see the temperature gauge sitting noticeably higher on long pulls compared to the V8. The naturally aspirated engine, without a turbo adding heat to the exhaust side, and without boost pressure adding cylinder pressure and combustion temperature, ran cooler and more consistently regardless of how long the climb lasted. Over hundreds of mountain pulls across 4 years, that thermal difference started to matter for long-term durability, and we'll get to exactly how in a minute. If you're finding this comparison useful so far, go ahead and hit that like button. Because what happened to these two trucks between
80,000 and 150,000 miles is the real reason we made this video. Around 90,000 miles, the EcoBoost truck developed a rattle on cold starts that lasted a few seconds before smoothing out. This is a well-documented issue with early generation EcoBoost engines, and it comes from the timing chain tensioners and cam phasers. Cam phasers control variable valve timing by using oil pressure to adjust camshaft position relative to the crankshaft, and they need immediate oil pressure the moment the engine fires to hold their position properly. On a cold start, oil takes a moment to build pressure and reach the phasers, and if the phaser mechanism has anywhere from years of thermal cycling and pressure fluctuation, you get that characteristic rattle until oil pressure catches up. Our EcoBoost truck's rattle got progressively longer over the following 20,000 miles, growing from about 1 second to nearly 4 seconds before quieting down. We had a Ford technician inspected at 110,000 miles, and while it wasn't failing yet, he confirmed early cam phaser wear consistent with what he sees on high-mileage EcoBoost engines that work hard, tow frequently, and experience a lot of heat cycling. The naturally aspirated 5-liter never developed any comparable noise. The Coyote Vive 8 uses a simpler timing chain design without the same variable cam timing complexity tied to oil pressure-dependent phasers in the same way, and it simply had fewer moving parts that could develop this kind of wear pattern. Around this same period, the EcoBoost truck also gave us a cold weather problem that the naturally aspirated truck never experienced at all. During a stretch of freezing mornings, the turbo truck developed a hesitation right after startup, almost like a momentary stumble under light acceleration before it smoothed out. This turned out to be a known issue with intercooler condensation. The intercooler cools the compressed air coming from the turbo before it enters the engine, and in cold, humid conditions, moisture can condense inside the intercooler housing. When you accelerate hard enough to build boost quickly, that pooled condensation gets pulled into the engine all at once, causing a brief misfire or stumble as the engine ingests water vapor instead of a clean air charge. It's not damaging in small amounts, but it happened repeatedly through 2 full winters on the EcoBoost truck, and it's simply not a failure mode that exists on a naturally aspirated engine because there's no intercooler and no compressed air charge to cool in the first place. The naturally aspirated truck started exactly the same in July and in January, every single time, with zero hesitation. We also had a scare early on with the EcoBoost truck that's worth mentioning, even though it turned out to be a non-issue for our specific truck. Earlier generations of the EcoBoost lineup were affected by a factory recall related to spark plugs that could work loose and eject from the cylinder head under boost pressure, taking part of the threads with them and requiring a cylinder head repair. Our 2019 model used updated plug hardware that addressed this, and we never experienced it, but it's a good example of how turbocharging adds unique failure modes that simply don't exist on naturally aspirated engines. Boost pressure puts additional stress on components that were originally designed around lower cylinder pressures, and manufacturers have had to continuously refine spark plug design, head gasket material, and fastener torque specs to keep pace with those higher stresses. The naturally aspirated 5.0 liter has none of these boost-related stresses to engineer around, which is a big part of why its problems throughout our test stayed limited to normal wear items instead of boost-specific failure points. Then there was carbon buildup, and this is where the difference became impossible to ignore. Both engines use direct injection, meaning fuel sprays directly into the combustion chamber instead of the intake port. This is great for efficiency and power, but it creates a problem because fuel never washes over the intake valves the way it does with older port injection systems. Without that washing effect, oil vapor from the PCV system and combustion blow-by gradually bakes onto the back of the intake valves and hardens into carbon deposits over time. This affects both engines, but the turbocharged engine showed it faster and worse. At our 120,000-mile inspection, we bore-scoped both engines' intake valves. The naturally aspirated 5.0 liter showed moderate carbon buildup, typical of any direct injection engine at that mileage, with some visible deposits but airflow still relatively unrestricted. The EcoBoost truck's intake valves showed significantly heavier buildup, with some valves showing deposits thick enough to visibly narrow the intake opening. The reason comes down to how these engines run under load. The turbo engine works its throttle and boost pressure harder more often to make the same power the larger displacement V8 makes with less effort, and the increased cylinder pressure and combustion temperature under boost accelerates the rate at which oil vapor bakes onto those valves. We had the EcoBoost truck's intake serviced with a walnut blasting procedure at 125,000 miles to clean the valves, something the naturally aspirated truck didn't need until closer to 170,000 miles, and even then the buildup was noticeably less severe. The turbocharger itself became the biggest cost difference in this entire comparison. At 145,000 miles, the EcoBoost truck started showing a slight whistle under boost that gradually became a whine. A shop inspection found early wear in the turbo's bearing, the small journal bearing that allows the turbine and compressor wheels to spin at speeds exceeding 100,000 revolutions per minute under load. These bearings run in an incredibly hostile environment, spinning at extreme speed while sitting inches from exhaust gas temperatures that can exceed 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with a modern water-cooled turbo housing, that kind of sustained heat and rotational stress wears the bearing over time, especially on a truck that towed as often as ours did. We replaced the turbocharger at 148,000 miles at a cost of just under $1,800 for the part and labor. The naturally aspirated truck obviously has no turbocharger at all, and therefore no equivalent failure point, no equivalent repair cost, and no equivalent source of future concern. This single repair item accounted for more unscheduled cost on the EcoBoost truck than almost anything else we experienced across the entire 200,000-mile test. Fuel economy told an equally interesting story, and it wasn't what most people expect. On paper, and in EPA testing, the turbocharged engine is rated for better fuel economy than the naturally aspirated V8, because smaller displacement generally sips less fuel at light throttle and cruising speed. In our real-world testing, that held true for unloaded highway driving and city commuting, where the EcoBoost truck averaged about 1.5 to 2 miles per gallon better than the V8 across 200,000 miles of identical routes. But the moment we added a trailer or heavy cargo, that advantage evaporated and often reversed. Turbocharged engines rely on boost pressure to make power, and building boost pressure under load requires more fuel to support the combustion happening at higher cylinder pressure. Towing that same 7,500-pound trailer, the EcoBoost truck's fuel economy dropped more dramatically than the naturally aspirated trucks did, because the V8 simply uses more of its available displacement and torque without needing to lean as hard into boost. Across our towing miles specifically, the naturally aspirated truck actually averaged slightly better fuel economy than the turbo truck, the opposite of what the window sticker would suggest. If your driving is mostly around town and highway commuting without much towing, the turbo's efficiency advantage is real. If you tow or haul heavy loads regularly, that advantage disappears and can flip in the V8's favor. By 160,000 miles, we started tracking every dollar spent on both trucks side by side, and the gap in maintenance costs became one of the clearest results of the entire experiment. If you are enjoying this deep dive, make sure you are subscribed, because the final cost breakdown at 200,000 miles is genuinely surprising. The naturally aspirated truck's major expenses through 200,000 miles were remarkably ordinary. Standard water pump replacement around 130,000 miles, a set of spark plugs at 100,000 miles, and normal wear items like brakes, tires, and a battery. Nothing outside what you would expect from any well-maintained truck at that mileage. Total unscheduled repair costs for the V8 truck across the full 200,000 miles came to just under $2,400. The EcoBoost truck told a very different story. Beyond the turbocharger replacement at $1,800, we also replaced a leaking intercooler hose at 105,000 miles, dealt with a stuck wastegate actuator at 155,000 miles that caused a check engine light and a noticeable reduced power symptom, and eventually had the cam phaser rattle addressed with an updated timing chain kit at 175,000 miles,
since it had progressed to the point where it was affecting cold start performance more noticeably. We also replaced a boost pressure sensor at 165,000 miles after it started throwing intermittent codes, a part that simply has no equivalent on an engine that does not rely on forced induction to make power. Total UN scheduled repair costs for the turbo truck came to just over $6,900, nearly triple what the naturally aspirated truck cost us in the exact same conditions, over the exact same miles, with the exact same maintenance schedule followed to the letter. Scheduled maintenance costs stayed close between the two trucks, which is worth pointing out because it is not like the naturally aspirated truck was somehow cheaper to maintain on paper. Oil changes, filters, fluid services, and routine inspections cost almost identical amounts on both trucks across 200,000 miles. The entire gap in total ownership cost came from unscheduled repairs tied directly to the added complexity of forced induction, the turbo itself, the wastegate, the intercooler plumbing, the boost pressure sensor, and the accelerated wear those components placed on the cam phasers and timing components. Every one of those parts exists specifically because the engine is turbocharged, and every one of them gave us at least one unscheduled repair somewhere across the 200,000-mile test. Resale Value told a similar story once we looked into it near the end of the test. We had both trucks appraised at independent dealers once they crossed 195,000 miles, disclosing full service history for both. The naturally aspirated truck appraised noticeably higher, and the appraisers cited the same reasoning almost word for word. Naturally aspirated V8 F-150s at high mileage are viewed as a safer used purchase because buyers are less worried about turbocharger failure, cam phaser rattle, or the kind of forced induction-related repairs that scare people away from high-mileage EcoBoost trucks. Even with a clean service history and full documentation of every repair, our turbo truck appraised for roughly 12% less than the naturally aspirated truck, despite identical mileage, identical trim, and identical condition. That gap alone tells you how the used market itself views long-term reliability between these two engines. None of this means the EcoBoost is a bad engine. It isn't. Turbocharged engines have improved enormously since Ford introduced this technology, and later generations of EcoBoost engines added things like dual port and direct injection to combat carbon buildup, which our 2019 model didn't have. If you're shopping for a newer EcoBoost F-150, some of these specific issues have been engineered out or significantly reduced. But for engines built during the years that used single direct injection without the dual injection system, and for owners who tow heavy loads regularly or put serious mileage on their trucks, the added complexity of a turbocharger operating under sustained heat and boost pressure creates more failure points, more heat-related wear, and more long-term costs than a simpler, naturally aspirated engine doing the same job with brute displacement instead of forced induction. By the time both trucks crossed 200,000 miles, the difference in ownership experience was stark. The naturally aspirated 5.0-liter truck ran with almost no drama for the entire test. It never left us stranded, it never triggered an unexpected repair bill over $1,000, and the cold start rattle that plagued the turbo truck simply never developed because there was no cam phaser oil pressure dependency creating that vulnerability in the first place. The EcoBoost truck, despite genuinely impressive power delivery, better initial acceleration, and real fuel economy advantages in unloaded driving, cost nearly 3 times as much to keep running reliably, developed carbon buildup faster, and needed a full turbocharger replacement that the naturally aspirated truck simply never had a comparable part to fail. If you're buying a truck for light-duty commuting, occasional light towing, and you want that responsive low-end power feel, the turbocharged EcoBoost is still a genuinely good engine, and Ford has improved the design significantly in newer model years. But if you're buying a truck to work hard, tow heavy trailers regularly, and keep it for 200,000 miles or more with the lowest possible long-term cost, our side-by-side test makes the answer clear. The naturally aspirated 5.0-liter V8 is the truck you want in your driveway for the long haul. Simpler design, fewer heat-related failure points, lower carbon buildup, and thousands of dollars less in repairs across identical use, identical mileage, and identical conditions. If you found this comparison valuable, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which engine you'd choose after seeing these numbers. We've got the full mileage logs and repair receipts if enough of you want to see the complete breakdown in a follow-up video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.